today. I'm Jimmy Blackmon with Exactus Advisors, and we've got some friends and industry leaders on to talk about how they're handling the crisis that we all find ourselves dealing with at the moment. So we've got with us today Clay Grubbs, CEO of Grubb Properties, a Charlotte-based company. We've got Dan Houlihan, Executive Vice President for Asset Management Americas with Northern Trust, and Major General Retired Jeff Slosher, who is Executive Vice President for Strategic Pursuits for Bell Helicopter, and also my business partner and our CEO, Tom Lebemoff. We're going to kind of set the table today with a template that we at Exactus have developed for trying to at least give you something to start working with as you try to stand up a crisis action center. I've written a white paper that gives an example of this from my 2009 experience in Afghanistan. That will be linked to this video below. You can take a look at that. But as we look at it, it's just something to really give you some ideas for what you might be able to do within your company to stand up and think about how you deal with crisis. And it's a 5-step process, as you can see on the screen now: mobilize, the crisis action center; analyze, decide, execute, and then your after action reviews. So I'm just briefly going to go through this to set the table, and then we'll kick it around to these other leaders to see what they're doing in their companies, what they're experiencing, and how they're choosing to deal with the situation we have. And I'd remind you not to consider this, the only crisis you're going to face. The idea is we create structure that we would be able to utilize at any time we face any crisis in the future in our company. No one certainly saw this one coming. So what's the next one? We just don't know that. Once we go around and talk about what we're dealing with currently, then we'll talk about for just a few minutes, now what? What is the new norm? For a long time, I thought probably 5 or 6 years after 9/11, there were people that still felt that at some point we'd flip a switch and go back to September the 10th, 2001, and that ship had sailed in reality, and there was a new norm. So let's talk about what the potential new norm might be coming out of this. What might we evolve to as we come out of this crisis we find ourselves in? So just to run around this very briefly, the first thing, standing up, mobilizing a crisis action center. It should be a battle drill, something we've thought through, we've rehearsed. We think about who should be in that, define the roles that they play, the processes that we use, our meeting cadence. And that meeting cadence could change. Right now in our company at Exactus Advisors, we're doing a morning stand-up meeting every day to discuss priorities for the day. And we close the day out just with some other media tools, not on a Zoom call. But we begin by looking at each other, talking to each other, talking about the priorities of the day, what we're going to focus on. And then we close out at the end of the day to see where we progressed and where we're going the following day. In the white paper, you'll see we chose to do that the evening prior. So most of our missions were at night, and we would plan for the following day, 24 hours out. So that meeting cadence can change based on the situation, the structure of your company, or the priorities that you have. And then, of course, the tools you use. In the white paper, I talk about a synchronization matrix. That was our primary tool for us in our company today. It's about tasking each individual with priorities and then follow-up. The second step then is to analyze. We must define the problem, clearly understand. Coronavirus is a problem. It's not our problem in our businesses right now. Each of us have various problems based on the industry we're in and the situation we find ourselves in. And so clearly defining that problem is vitally important for us. And then develop the strategy and prioritize our objectives. What can we control? There's a lot of things outside our control, but understanding what we can control and prioritizing those efforts is important. Inventory and our available resources. We may have a lot of vendors that we don't control. Their businesses may be shut down. Subcontractors may not be working. So how does that affect us? And how can we, again, take control of the things that we can control? So inventorying those things is important. And then listing limitations and constraints. As you'll see in the white paper below, those are very different things. Limitations are things that we're limited by that we don't control. We simply don't have but so much capital. We only have so many trucks. Constraints are things we place on ourselves. In the white paper, I talk about we chose to manage risk by only flying with certain illumination at night. So that was a constraint we placed on ourselves. We could have changed that, but we had to manage that risk. Next is decide. In terms of decide, we allocate resources against those priorities we set in the analyzation process. We assign individual and departmental tasks, then clearly communicate our strategy and prioritization. And then I put validate organizational alignment. This is something I see lacking in a lot of companies. I talk to a lot of senior executives in companies. They clearly know their strategy. They can see it, and they think they talk about it all the time. But then I go 2 levels down in the organization and ask questions and find out that those folks 2 levels below them have a very different picture. And so a tool that we can use is the back brief. We simply ask, what did I tell you? What are the expectations? What are the priorities? And have them repeat those back to us. So that's what I mean by validating our organizational alignment, and understanding that we all share the same vision. Then we go to execute, and during the execution phase, we continuously assess our performance. Expect issues right now. Again, there's a lot of things outside our control, but good, fast, adaptable, flat organizations with trust and empowerment are able to very quickly see that they're a degree or 2 off course, and they can adapt and adjust as needed. So they display agility. And then, of course, as I said, every afternoon, we're sitting down saying, okay, what did we say we were going to do today? What actually happened? Why did it happen? What did we learn? And what are we going to do next? And that's not only bad days when things go wrong, we conduct after action reviews, but also when things go well. We may establish a new best practice. We learn and grow through these after action reports, and then we continue that process. Again, right now we're using this simple process in our company to move forward along our priorities and our strategy. So with that, now I want to kick it around to Clay and let Clay discuss kind of what he's done in the construction industry, what he's faced and dealing with, and recommendations he might make. Clay.
Great. Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate you having me. I'm Clay Grubb with Grubb Properties. And one of the things that I have found that, in these crises, you need to plan, but it is very important to do the after action reviews. And that's something we've been doing for close to a decade. And we've gone through a number of disasters from, I think the first time I met Jimmy, we had a property that we had to evacuate 215 families because of the largest fire in over 100 years in Raleigh. And we've had a pest infestation problem where we had to vacate an entire property. We've certainly had hurricanes that have resulted in vacating entire properties. And so, and having been through 2008, and really this is our 8th recession as a company. And one of the big things in any recession or any crisis is trying to balance compassion with reaction, with greed, whatever, all that comes into play. And we have residents and tenants that live and work with us that depend on the places we provide for their to sleep and to work. And we have investors that expect rent and distributions, and so we're always trying to figure that out. So as we entered into this period, we actually on January 31st had a senior retreat and talked about the impact of war and plague and what that could do to our industry and business. Having seen what was going on in China, having seen what was going on in Iran and Iraq, and I actually was close to both of those. I was in Jordan at the time Iran-Iraq conflict was going, and my daughter is a student at NYU Shanghai, and her school never opened this spring. And so we had kind of been close to both of those and felt like we need to start preparing. So the end of February, we set up a task force that would start dealing with this. we started communicating daily on March 3rd. I actually contracted COVID-19 on March 4th, and so was closer to it than I had planned. Fortunately, I'm 100% well, and I did infect the other people I came in contact with on the 4th when I first contracted the virus, um, but have not infected anyone else after that date, and so feel fortunate of that, and that my family and everybody in our company is healthy. But we really started thinking about, okay, what is it going to be that folks are interested in? We realized fear is going to be the number one thing that sets in with all of our residents and all of our tenants. And so we immediately came out of the gate with, okay, what is the most compassionate thing we can do, but also fiduciarily prudent for our investors? And so we decided cash flow was king, and we first thing we rolled out was a 10% discount to all 4,800 residents that live with us if they would pay their April rent by April 1st. And we felt that was very important, that we get cash in early and we have a reward for them. A lot of people are like, well, hey, the good payers are going to pay and they're going to take advantage of the discount, and the bad payers that aren't going to pay no matter what you give them. And we're big into loyalty. And so just the letters that have come in from have been furloughed, that aren't sure what they're going to do, and how thankful they are that we're providing some compassion and some relief has been very meaningful. Um, and it's really motivating for the team to know that we're a part of that. And then we've decided, okay, if you are a late payer, instead of charging our typical late fee on the 5th, we're going to allow folks to pay half their rent on the 10th and the other half on the 25th. The nice thing about this program is that we are showing we're working with folks. And it was exciting, like CNN actually quoted our program yesterday, and the Urban Institute held us up as a leader in our industry for being proactive and balancing those. And so that was nice recognition. We weren't counting on that. Wasn't why we did it, but it's a nice boost, and it's nice to point to with our investors. And so we're excited about that. Then with our office tenants and our restaurants, it was quick to say, all right, what do we do? These guys are going to all run out of money. They've got very little money. Let's give the restaurants an incentive to give us some cash. And so we decided with our restaurants, who were all forced closed, if you paid us March's rent, we would waive April and May. If you paid us April's rent, we would waive 3 months instead of 2 months. And then we reached out to our office tenants and said, hey, we're expecting you to pay April, but if you extend your leases by 6 months, we'll give you 1 month free starting in May. And so we have a lot of office tenants that aren't going to take us up on that, but they've all been very appreciative that we've tried to work with them. And but most of them are just scared, and they're like, I don't know if I can add extra term. But I think it really helps change the table for us, and we've called all 200 of our office tenants now, let them know that we're with them, we're trying to help them through it. And then the other part was obviously communicating to our investors that, hey, this is what we're doing it early. And obviously with my investors living through having had the sickness was a little bit more of a roller coaster too. But the big thing that they wanted to hear about was our business continuity plan. What was going to happen if I got sick and something happened to me? And fortunately, in February, my 2 leaders and I actually went through a whole scenario of what we would do if 2 of us were lost and only one of the 3 of us was left to run the company. And I think that was important communication then that we could share. So Jimmy, I think that covers the bulk of what we've done, and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so succession planning very important for every organization. Obviously, you mentioned there. Can I just ask, what kind of rhythm are you meeting? Like, are you still meeting daily with your task force, and kind of how did you decide to make that up if you're doing that?
Yes, so the task force is still meeting daily. It was started out kind of as an every other day, has been daily. We'll probably drop back to every other day next week. And because it's really the most intense part, I think it has been the last 2 to 3 weeks. And we really made it up from the folks that we felt were critical for different parts of the organization. And at the end of the day, I would say we ended up with two task force, one really on operations and the other more on communications and investors.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, let's go over to Dan. How are you dealing with it in the wealth management industry and
Yeah,
banking?
yeah. Hi, Jimmy. So, I represent Northern Trust, and we are a large global bank, and let me just give you context of what we do. So we've got three main business lines. We've got an asset manager that manages approximately $1 trillion in assets. And we've got a wealth manager who looks after the wealth of high net worth individuals and families. And then we have an asset servicing business, which is what I run. And that business supports really the daily financial system. So what we do is we execute trades on the different exchanges, both for traditional securities as well as foreign currencies. We price regulated mutual funds every day. So we price over 2,000 funds. We're moving billions of dollars of cash every day. So absolutely critical that we continue to function. We're also, because we're a bank, we're heavily regulated. So from a preparation standpoint, I'm pleased to say we have been prepared. We had organized the governance and the task force. We've done all the disaster planning and work from home proving out, if you will. Never in a million years did I think we'd actually have to execute that on the scale that we have. But just to give you a sense of that scale, we've got 21,000 employees in 26 different countries. And the business that I run, again, critical to the daily execution of the financial system. And the mobilization of getting to the point we're at now was incredibly dynamic in the sense that we've got 6,000 folks in India, for example, in two different cities, Pune and Bangalore. We've got another 1,000 people in Manila. And so, our first priority remains the health and well-being and safety of our teams. Different jurisdictions, different governments have handled the lockdown in different ways. So in India, for example, it was a complete lockdown. No one was allowed out on the streets. So we had to lobby different governments to be able to get exemptions so that we could actually deliver computers and monitors to people's homes to be able to do the work. And I'm happy to say I think we're right now at 98% work from home. And most all deliverables are being met, which is an accomplishment. I would say as an industry, it's quite impressive that this is working. So all of that preparation and planning has paid off. But now we're in this separate mode that now that we've sort of operationalized everything, like you're talking about, we're having daily, and we're doing it on multiple levels, but daily touch point meetings to ensure, look at what happened yesterday is because our operating model is complex. We follow the sun. So Asia starts the day and then we move work to Europe and then to here. So every morning it's an assessment of how yesterday went in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and how things are heading in the US, and then making any adjustments that we need to. So for example, we've in certain cases, because of what was going on 1 week in India, we had to move a lot of work from India back to the US. And so to do that from a capacity standpoint, we had to call on folks that were no longer in the operations side of the business, but had prior experience to go back in and help offset some of that capacity. So all of that's been really amazing to be a part of, and humbling in a sense, a bit sobering to as a senior leader to really appreciate who the most important people in the company are. And I would tell you that it is effectively not me, certainly today. But what I found really interesting is the human side of it. And so the daily governance that we have, what I'm seeing now is that the adrenaline of everybody rising to the occasion is actually starting to wear off a bit. And the emotional toll is starting to sort of rear itself. And what I am imploring my leaders to do is to make sure it's very easy for me to fall into the trap that, I'm very fortunate. I'm a senior leader, financially stable, I've got good health. Not everybody is in that same situation. We've got a large employee base. And, for example, the paradigm of working from home in India is very different from the paradigm of working from my home here in Lake Forest, Illinois. But we've got single parents who have children who are trying to balance e-learning as well as the execution of their jobs. And so what we're really trying to do now, in addition to keeping the lights on and making daily assessments about what we need to do, is really driving down and making that personal connection with our staff. And it's difficult because it's HR and not everybody's forthcoming. But we've got employees whose spouses have lost their job. We've got employees whose spouse or family member is in the healthcare industry, which increases the stress and the risk of infection. So for me, it's been interesting from a leadership perspective and paradigm to say, even from a financial perspective, and I know, Clay, you talked about your philosophy on that. And my philosophy is very much that, most organizations, certainly our organization, is going to be negatively financially impacted by this. But what I have been saying to our CEO is that at the end of the day, and of course, easy for me to say not being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but at the end of the day, no one's going to remember whether we were 10 million or 100 million off the numbers. The only thing that our staff are going to remember and think about is what we did as leaders to help get through this crisis. So, so we're doing daily checks on that. So, you asked about the daily rigor. So I have several meetings every morning, but the one with my directs, we talk about the people first. So how are our teams doing? Are there things that we can do either on an individual basis? We've talked about things like getting delivery services to have essential things delivered to people who, for whatever reason, can't get out of the house. So how are we doing with our people? How are we doing with our clients? The daily assessment of operations, obviously, and how BAU is working and what modifications we need to make. And then, it's all about staying in touch and staying in tune with those that are doing the important work that we have to deliver on each day. Now, the last thing I would say is we're now, I don't have a crystal ball, none of us do, in terms of how long this will continue, but and it'll vary based on jurisdiction. But let's just say, for example, that in Chicago, April 30th is the date. I suspect that will get extended, but if it is lifted, that's not the end of the story by any stretch. Schools will still be closed, daycares will still be closed. So some contingent of our teams will just simply not be able to come back into the office. And so we've got some difficult decisions to make as leaders about, who do we authorize or who do we ask to actually come back into the office. So we went through this mobilization. Now we're leading in this new paradigm, and now we're just starting the process of saying, okay, how are we going to emerge out of the backside of this? And that's a work in progress.
Thanks, Dan. And my apologies. I said EVP of Asset Management, and I misspoke. Asset Services.
That's quite okay.
My fault. Okay, let's move over to General Slosher from Bell.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jimmy. So my background, as Jimmy alluded to, is partly military, 34 years in the U.S. Army. I started off leading soldiers, are about 30 people as a youngster, and then at my last job, I had 32,000 in Afghanistan, and a lot of them were very diverse. They were NATO countries. Jimmy and I worked closely together there while we were both in Afghanistan, and by the way, he's a real hero there, if you all don't know that. But then, I went into transition into industry. I'm in the aerospace industry with Bell Helicopter. It's formerly known. We rebranded just Bell. But what we have is about 8,000 people scattered around the globe with production facilities in Canada, United States, and Mexico, as well as engineering centers around the world, including India, Singapore, as you might expect. And then finally, we run a training academy on the commercial side in China. So we've had pretty huge exposure during this pandemic and during the crisis. And so I'm going to give you some thoughts about that as we go forward. First, whether you're leading a company with 10 people or 30,000, if you're a leader, your time is critical. And so trying to figure that out You've got to figure out a rhythm that will make some sense and allow you to not only make decisions where you should be making decisions, and I'm going to highlight that in a second, but then also you have to maintain visibility. And that's really a struggle right now during the remote working thing that we are having to work with this pandemic. But it's all possible. So let me kind of start off with something I think Jimmy alluded to as he went through the rhythm portion and the decision-making process. You know, in the military, what you use, you have folks that are, you have three different ways of looking about decision-making. You have a current operation, and that is basically today. And you have people devoted to that. And then you have a future operation. Again, it's operations, so it's still tactical. It still is, what do we do in the production line? How's our supply chain? Things of that nature. But that's looking out from, you know, tomorrow through the next several weeks. And then probably most importantly, you have plans. And plans is what do you do next year based upon the opportunities and the economic impact of any crisis that you have. And so as you get higher inside of a company, the importance of the tactical is always, it's always hugely important to your company. But where do you spend your time? And that's where I'd like to focus on a little tiny bit is that in Bell, for an example, we spend the early morning hours. In fact, this is actually my fourth WebEx. It's not a WebEx, I know, but I've done 3 WebExes this morning. 2 of them involving my boss, the CEO, and my peers, the other 9 ELT members or executive vice presidents of Bell. We're scattered pretty much. We're not all in one location, and so we're communicating via WebEx. We cover down on the tactical in the early morning, and so that's everything from what's the supply chain today looking like. Again, we have a global supply chain, and they're all operating under different things. So, for an example, if Mexico shuts down, even what's considered to be in the United States a defense essential company, it is slow. It has an impact upon us, and we have to know what the inventory is, and just how long can we actually continue to produce our product. We need to check also on our production floors because we're asking people to come in, and many of your companies, you're probably doing the same thing, whether you've got a machine shop of 5 people or you've got you're producing automobiles up there in Detroit or someplace else. You're asking people to come in so that you can maintain your product line. And how are you taking care of them? So for an example, what have you thought about doing now? How are you emphasizing to them that you really care? Do you have a doctor or nurse on site? Do you have thermometers that can be non-intrusive, but yet test, for fever? What have you done to keep social spacing on the production floor and make sure that they can clean their hands all the time? So those are the kinds of things that are tactical, and we have people that are empowered to actually brief us. We make only the critical decisions. The CEO and our executive leadership team are only focused on the tactical point so that we know, 2, we can communicate broadly, which is our job, and 3, we make only the tough choices. Are there areas where we're going to need to do a furlough or some sort of a layoff? Are there areas where we can clearly see that in 4 weeks we are going to have a production line stoppage? Those are critical for us, and so obviously we pay attention during that. But more importantly, most of us spend the afternoons and the evenings thinking about the strategic portion, which is the plans portion. During any of these kind of crises, let me just be quite blunt, there is a lot of opportunity. There are going to be companies like your competitors that are going to be unable to resume their operations in any coherent way for a period of time. You may not be able to either, but you may have other sectors that you can move into. The idea of spending a fair amount of time focused on the future is really important. And I think for all leaders, you really need to just sit down and kind of do a little diagram, just like Jimmy did, but say, okay, I've got to do all those things. How am I going to divide up my time? I would say probably the last thing that I will talk about is that as a leader, you've got to communicate. And in a remote working environment, it is really tough. We're talking about, for Bell, we've got union workers on a production floor in Dallas-Fort Worth. We've got Canadian workers on a production floor in Mirabel. Same thing in Mexico. Plus we have engineers that are divided by time zones in the East. And so doing that in a way that's coherent and that also makes good sense we spend a fair amount of time doing that in the afternoon. I mean, we are currently right now, we put out a daily update that goes to every member of Bell. So every employee that they can see, they can pick that up on their computer and they can read. And they have it displayed on the production floor on computers television screens that we have. More importantly, though, we've done the CEO, the HR folks, the IO integrated operations senior leaders have done clips where they just, for 1 minute, they give an analysis of some specific thing that's very interesting and critical to an employee or a potential employee. So for an example, if we're going to do a targeted furlough, we communicate that to our employees in a way that is coherent to them. And they get it in a video clip, and then they're able to actually ask questions, on an online forum, and then we answer those back within the same day. That's there's a lot of other ways to maintain your communication within your team. It depends upon how big it is. You don't have to expose yourself and get within a big meeting room to do that. There are just a lot of ways to do that. And I just say, use your, all your creativity, but you've got to communicate calmness. And to do that, you've got to be able to see your people one way or the other. And with that, Jimmy, I'll close. Thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. I want to give Tom an opportunity. Tom, do you have any questions for any of the panelists before we move on to the next segment?
Yeah, no, this is great. Jeff, just curious are you dealing with any unions internally that cause complications, especially for workers that may contract COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, I mean, and you've seen this throughout the industry, whether it's the aerospace or the defense industry. Some unions want to press to have, a period of time, a break away from the union floor or from the production floor at full pay, of course. And then others want to definitely, they see themselves, as long as they're working, they don't have to worry about a furlough. So we are spending time with the union each and every day, our unions, because we have a variety of them, as you might expect, around the globe. Doing that's really important. We use our normal interlocutors with the union, so we haven't done anything weird. No crisis orientation with the unions, but we're trying to make sure that we communicate very clearly with them where we're at this time. And of course, they're all worried about the supply chain, as you might expect.
Yeah, one of the things I think, of just listening to everybody, if you think about the peripheral, the transparency that you're going to get from, let's say, your customers, your suppliers, and the companies have, just like us, we focused on our people first. And then it was really the products or services, right, that we're selling, similar to you guys. And then, ultimately, you're getting to profits. And it seems to me that the processes that we've all created to run the companies gearing towards products or services, right, to customers, is getting changed essentially for this type of event. And so I guess what I mean is most of these companies that you think about, and Dan, you're very matrixed organization across, but all of a sudden, tomorrow the several financial institutions, many of them are going to have to deal with this influx of payroll and this form that has to be filled out. Some are building websites, and that crosses all of this chasm of silos and functions in a company. Have you guys looked at, maybe it's part of this Crisis Action Center, where you're changing the entire process to focus and one person's accountable for that one activity or a massive activity that's really bigger than anything else that you have in the company? Is there anything, similar to Clay for you? You had to communicate out to all of your tenants in one shot that you're going to, help with some kind of rent relief. And, it seems like it's hard to describe that, because you have companies that are used to operating the way they do under normal circumstances. And these aren't normal right now. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so Tom, I have a response to that. I mean, we in our pre-planning for things like this, again, never having expected to actually do it, we're a bank, so we can probably give the Army a run for their money in terms of acronyms, but we have what's called a CIRT, CIRT, which is a corporate incident response team, as well as ALERT, which is the local incident response team. And those are by design cross-functional governing bodies that represent the matrix, if you will. And we can talk about how I despise matrix management in another webinar someday. But yeah, we've got that in place, and it seems to be working quite well. We too send out a daily update to the entire organization, and then I think we're at bi-weekly now updates for our clients. So it's, I have to say, it's been really, I have to say I'm proud of our organization for being able to operationalize this work from home in so many different locations and have it stay together. So.
Jeff, it sounds like
and
you
I would
guys.
say,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, one of the things is it's important that you play defense all along the way, so that when you get in a crisis like this, you can start to figure out what would be the appropriate offense. And so with that in mind, we have 200 unique leases with commercial tenants, 4,800 residents. All of our investors are pushing us to play, man-to-man ball or combat, hand-to-hand combat, and because they want to maximize every dollar from every tenant, and that was really hard to resist, because at the end of the day, if we did that, it would completely swamp our ship and would end up being extremely demotivating. Dan talked a lot about resiliency and keeping people's, spirits up. Well, there's nothing worse than, having non-disclosure agreements from the restaurant that's next to the other restaurant, and you're saying, hey, you guys can't communicate about the deal we cut between y'all. When at the end of the day, they're going to communicate no matter what. And even if they can't communicate, they're going to be very suspicious that they're not getting as good a deal as their neighbor. And so we really tried to get rid of that feeling of being suspicious about what we were doing. And so all of our people would be free to be as transparent as possible. And we felt like that was really critical.
Okay,
Jeff, go ahead, Jimmy.
I want to go ahead and push into now the backside to start thinking in terms, as General Slusher put it, our plans down the road coming out of this. As I mentioned when we first started this, I remember standing in Iraq in 2006 and making the joke or sarcastically saying, there are people that actually think we're going to go back to the way it used to be. And that's just unrealistic. I don't know what's going to change out of this. It's hard to forecast that, but we have to have a portion of our energy devoted toward what are we learning about ourselves, an ongoing after action review, if you will, because I think all of you could list quite a few things that you've learned about yourself. Dan made a joke saying, I learned that I wasn't as important as I thought I was. I'm not there, and things are still happening. We thought telecommuting was big. Well, now we've been forced to really telecommute, and we may say, well, why aren't we, having more people do that? Can we downsize our brick and mortar size? Do we really need all this space and overhead? Now, to balance that, I talk to organizations a lot about this, is, how do you create vision? How do you build teams? How do you build those relationships of trust? That's harder to do virtually than it is eye to eye, a hand on the shoulder. But we are certainly going to evolve. I'm interested in your thoughts of kind of, if you want to give a few things you've learned about yourself, but also strategically, have we outsourced too much to China? Do you think globally we could see some shifts in terms of those things, if you want to hit from the tactical to the strategic level on those? And Clay, I'll let you go first.
So, starting with the China question, I mean, it was really interesting because the first thing that happened to us is we could not get flooring for apartments we had under construction because it was coming out of China because they had the virus and the factories were all sitting empty. So, I don't think in my opinion, it's an issue of trade with China. It's an issue of single sourcing. It's like, as in the real estate business, you never just have one lender. And your supply chain needs to be the same. You need to have different sources and you need to think about the risk. Are they on the coast or are they in Mexico or are they in China, wherever they may be? But I think at the end of the day, this is an opportunity for each of us to really determine our legacy and what are we going to do during this crisis? What is it that we're going to inspire other folks to achieve, keep their spirits up, keep moving forward? From our standpoint, we talk a lot about zigging when everybody else is zagging and trying to really get ahead of these things. And so, also one of the first things that we rolled out, which I didn't mention, was we went ahead and did a 50-cent per hour pay raise for all of our hourly people. We have a little over 100 hourly people. Many of them aren't working the same amount of hours, so we're probably still having payroll savings. But the reality is most of them are putting their health and their lives and their families at risk when they have to go to that apartment because the hot water heater burst and it's an emergency and they've got to save that family from complete disruption and so we felt like that was real important to show compassion and we're really spending a lot of time now talking about what does the world look like? When does it come back? What are the opportunities? And one of the things that we started focusing on was having apartment communities near hospitals. Well, that has been reinforced tenfold because our properties that are near hospitals, we're not expecting to have delinquency in rents because all those people are in very high demand, working a lot of overtime. The last thing they want to do is even talk to us. And so it's just important to think through different things, and we're actually quite bullish that the world will start improving in the third quarter. We don't think growth will be some pop back V curve. It will be slow. But we do think there'll start to be growth, and with growth, there'll be hopefulness and light at the end of the tunnel.
Super, thanks, Clay. Dan?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, Jeff said it earlier, in an odd sense, this is an opportunity. I think for us as leaders, I echo what Clay said. This is an opportunity to see and show what we're made of. And I don't mean that at all from a financial management or day-to-day execution management perspective so much as I do judgment, what's important, the philosophy of you as a leader and as an organization. And it's been really interesting for me to see other senior leaders and how they react and their perspective on what's the right thing to do certainly from a financial standpoint. And so, there's been a good deal of self-learning for myself, but I'm making some pretty interesting observations about others. In some cases are surprising. In other cases, I'm very impressed and have a different perspective of some of these folks.
Super, thanks, Dan. Joe Slusher?
Oh, did I just lose you? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was jotting down some notes. I think that was Clay. Clay, it just comes to mind that you're going to find, we will all find, everybody in business or in the industry, you're going to identify some great leaders out there. You're going to be able to see folks that can communicate, can make good decisions under stress, and that's one of the things that will come out of this. The other thing is I'm going to say is that strategically things will never be the same. We'd like to think they can go back, but they really won't go back exactly the way they were. And we just have to understand that and try to identify how will it impact, your company. It always strikes me, I learned this back in war, and I know Jimmy learned it too, is you make decisions based upon either I'm going to stop something or I'm going to start something. And then when you do that, the harder part is later on is when do you try to go back to what you previously had? In other words, okay, I'm going to stop doing this or I'm going to start remote working because of the threat of this virus. Okay, how are you going to make the decision that you're going to actually go back to the way things used to be? In other words, and we're not going to remote work. I think, as Jimmy had highlighted, that could change dramatically. Let me go way up though in the stratosphere and just say some impacts that I see. There would be significant impact to the U.S. budget. Right now, many of us in aerospace and defense enjoy a fair amount of support from the Hill. That is going to radically change. That's a discretionary budget. And believe me, people are going to start focusing on the national security aspects of things like pandemics and medical care and things of that nature. And I think you can see that coming within the next several months, but certainly within the next couple of years. I think that a huge growth area is going to be medical. I mean, we pride ourselves on medical research here in the United States, but if you look at just beds per communities and things of that nature, we're actually closing rural hospitals as we speak rather than opening them up. Things are going to change in that field, I think, pretty dramatically as people decide to get very serious at the local level with their elected politicians, and that will change, I think, over time. So those are just a couple comments, Jimmy.
Thank you. Tom, any closing questions before I wrap it up?
Yeah, no, I think from what I see, I think the commercial real estate is going to be hit because at some point companies are looking at, I'm still hitting my numbers. My sales force isn't traveling. I'm not marketing as much. So I think there's going to be a whole after action that is kind of it's more beyond lessons learned and more strategic of really where are we going to be spending the dollars and how should we operate? Do we need to have as much space, real estate space? Do we need to have our salespeople on the road, spending dollars when maybe it's more efficient and as effective is what we're seeing today? I have 2 clients that have record sales. They're in manufacturing this past month, and they're worried more around the fall timeframe. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes after this. Typically consulting for us is a bellwether of when things are starting to become bad, but also it will be as things start to come back, we're the early ones to come out of it, really any of the service industry. So we're fortunate enough that we have a solid business and good cash. I think, Clay, as you said, cash flow's king. And I think we all are nodding, absolutely, cash is king. And so there's going to be a lot of companies that drop out. But it's great to be on with you guys. So hand it over, Jimmy.
Well, thanks to all of our panelists. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. All 3 of you are personal friends, so I thank you for that as much as anything else. I've learned a lot from all 3 of you, not just today, but obviously with General Slosher back 20 years. So thanks for taking the time to hopefully generate some ideas for business owners. It is a stressful period of time for a lot of folks, and we just want to at Exactus try and do what we can to help and generate ideas, not looking for a dime, just trying to help folks in a meaningful way as we work our way through this. So thanks for your time today. 3, 2, 1.